In 1999, a researcher drilled a hole in a wall. On one side of that wall, a computer with an internet connection. Nothing else. On the other side, a slum in New Delhi. Children who had never seen a computer, who had never been taught to type, and who had no one standing over them to explain what any of it meant. Within hours, those children were navigating websites. Within 3 months, they had taught themselves enough English to use Microsoft Word. No test, no curriculum, no institution. What Professor Mitra saw when he returned to that wall did not just change educational policy. It issued a direct indictment against the assumption that human beings need to be taught rather than simply given the conditions to learn. So let's start with a question. If children with no resources, no instruction, no teacher can teach themselves, then why does every classroom in America operate on the assumption that all children must passively learn? The answer, as you are about to see, is not a mistake. First, let's map out what happens inside your brain. When you choose to learn something, when you decide the question, something precise and measurable happens inside your prefrontal cortex. Your brain releases dopamine, not after you find the answer, before. Neuroscientists call this anticipatory dopamine, and it is one of the most consequential discoveries in the science of how the brain learns. When your brain is genuinely curious, when it has locked onto a question it generated on its own terms, it floods itself with dopamine in anticipation of the answer. It rewards the pursuit of knowledge, not just the result. Now, some of you are thinking, dopamine is just a reward signal. What does it have to do with how well I learn? Well, everything. Dopamine doesn't simply feel good. It's a direct trigger for myelin production, the fatty sheath that wraps around your neural pathways and develops how fast, how strong, and how reliably those pathways fire. Every time you follow genuine curiosity to its conclusion, your brain is building what neuroscientists call white matter infrastructure, faster connections, deeper encoding, more durable recall. Truly, that pathway from curiosity to wisdom. Now contrast that realization with what happens inside an environment designed for passive learning. A teacher assigns a chapter, a student reads it, not because the question is burning within them, but because a grade is attached to the outcome. The information is processed, but the dopamine signal is different. It barely exists. The brain is not anticipating an answer to the question. It is accepting a task to avoid a consequence. The prefrontal cortex and the limbic system are not operating in the same collaborative mode. The myelination is not as deep or strong. The architecture being built inside the brain is categorically different from a brain that chose to go down the rabbit hole at midnight because it had to know the answer. This isn't coincidence. It's a neural architecture. So let's ask the question that matters. If curiosity-driven learning produces measurably stronger neural architecture, if the brain was literally wired by evolution to teach itself, then why has every school in America spent the last, say, 130 years doing the opposite? The answer is not an accident. In 1892, 10 men sat in a boardroom and made a decision that would shape every classroom in this country for the next century. They called themselves the Committee of 10. They were not neuroscientists. They were not child development specialists. They were administrators, university presidents, and industrialists. And they were solving a very specific problem. They needed workers. The industrial economy required people who could precisely follow instructions, repeat tasks without deviation, and follow institutional authority. And so they built a system with bells, with grades, with rows of desks facing the front of the room, optimized not for cognitive flourishing, but optimized for cognitive compliance. Have you ever heard the phrase, "I pay you to work, not to think"? That's a direct result of this system. Now, I know some of you are thinking, but that was 1892. Surely modern education has evolved past that. Well, walk into any school in America today and count the rows. The average American student spends approximately 15,000 hours inside the compulsory education system. In those 15,000 hours, they receive instruction in history, algebra, literature, and chemistry. Not one of those hours is dedicated to teaching them how to use their own brain, how the brain works. No instruction on dopamine, no discussion on myelination, no framework of metacognition, the brain's capacity to monitor and direct its own thinking, also the highest form of learning. We teach students what to know, but we have never taught them how to learn. And then we wonder why so many people reach adulthood feeling unprepared for a world that now demands independent thought, critical and creative thinking. The one thing the institution never purposefully taught. This is one of the most dangerous failures of our time, not because the system was built with malicious intent, but because it worked. It produced exactly what it was designed to produce. The question is whether you are willing to build something different. The children at Professor Mitra's wall were not prodigies. They were not selected based on high IQ. They had not been trained. They carried no advantage that you personally do not carry right now. They had been given one thing educational institutions rarely provide: permission. Permission to be confused. Permission to fail without consequence. Permission to pursue a question that had no predetermined answer on a standardized rubric. And that permission activated the full architecture of the human learning system. Here are 3 protocols that every self-directed mind runs by default, and that the institution systematically removes. Protocol 1: follow the question, not the curriculum. The brain does not learn efficiently from information it was told to consume. It learns from problems it is actively trying to solve. If you want to accelerate your development in any domain, identify the question that genuinely unsettles you, and then pursue it. Do not wait for someone to hand you a syllabus. The curriculum will fill itself in around the question you cannot let go. Protocol 2: teach to learn. Research from Washington University shows that students who teach material to others encode it at dramatically higher levels than those who simply study it, a phenomenon called protege effect. When your brain knows when it must explain something, it reorganizes that information. It creates retrieval pathways in the brain. It builds redundancy into the architecture. Teaching is not just sharing of knowledge, it is the completion of it. And then protocol number 3, struggle deliberately. This is the protocol every comfort-seeking brain resists, and it is the most important one. The moment of confusion. You know, that moment right before clarity arrives? Well, that's not a failure of intelligence. It is the moment of myelination. That friction you feel when a concept crystallizes is your brain physically constructing new infrastructure. Every time you resist the impulse to look up an answer on your phone, to run an email through ChatGPT, or to skip past a hard part of a task, you are choosing to build a stronger mind. The struggle is the growth. This is not how to be productive. These are the core operating instructions your brain came with. It's pre-programmed. The children who learned at that wall in 1999 were not given better content. They were not given better teachers. They were given the conditions their brains were designed for: curiosity, autonomy, the permission to not know, and the freedom to figure it out. Those same conditions are available to you right now. I know from personal growth. When I left high school, I was a student languishing in mediocrity. I had a 2.2 GPA and I could barely read. I took one class, neuropsychology, and that changed everything. I am Dr. Jonathan Strecker, author of Emergence: How Modern Convenience is Dumbing Down Our Children and What Parents and Schools Can Do About It. Be curious, my friends.